an athlete, I was consuming a lot of
Less substance.
carbohydrates.
Hmm.
Yes. So to go from eating almost 500 grams a day to eating 10.
I am so honored to have a person that has been a huge influence in my life as I have been curious about the carnivore journey and got started with this. It's been close to 3 years for me now. And Michelle has this amazing book that was a cornerstone, The Dietitian's Dilemma. I have it on Kindle. I've had it, we often have it at Rebecca's retreats. Such an overall comprehensive resource that covers so many of the basic areas, but also tells Michelle's incredible healing story, which is heartbreaking and is vulnerable. And so it just has everything right there in one little spot. So it is such an honor to actually get to visit with you today about these things.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you like the book, and just thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So give my listeners a little bit of a background for where you've been at, and we'll get into what you're currently doing, what your current focus is, because I feel like this was a magnum opus of itself, potentially. I don't know how much went into writing that book, but tell me about your background and tell me about the lead up to actually getting something out there that can help people.
Yeah. So, my health journey really begins when I was 12. When I was 12, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I was about 5 feet tall and 57 and a half pounds. So incredibly, sick, was given about a 10% chance to survive, was put in an inpatient institution, and immediately put on the, standard American diet, put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. And the tube feeding ingredients back then, which interestingly, this was I was 12 at the time. I'll be 40 in a couple months. Tube feeding ingredients back then were corn syrup solids, maltodextrin, canola oil, soy protein, and they're actually the same today. Like, they haven't really improved that much. And, as a 12-year-old, I was put on 7 different medications because I had severe anxiety, depression, racing thoughts around food. When I was put on the tube feeding and the standard diet, I started having all kinds of GI issues, constipation, diarrhea, then I get nauseous. And I was just told this was normal. This was part of the refeeding process. And I was also told, as somebody with an eating disorder, this was my lot in life. This is something I was going to struggle with forever. If I survived, if I made it, I was going to have to just become a really high functioning human with an eating disorder. And that was pretty scary as a 12-year-old, but they weren't wrong. I did become weight restored, but throughout my adolescence and into adulthood, I was constantly struggling with thoughts around nutrition. Did I eat too much? Did I eat enough? Am I dealing with body dysmorphia, thinking I'm overweight even when I was lean? And, I describe it as I felt like I was sitting on the sidelines of my own life. Like, I would often have panic attacks. I struggled with, social, being around people. But I knew food was powerful because I went from obviously being very sick to now being weight restored. So I was curious, and I thought if I became a dietitian, like if I could dive into this field of nutrition, there had to be something I was missing, right? Like, there had to be something that I wanted to see, like, could I make this stop? Could I make all these racing thoughts stop? Could I heal some of my depression?
You thought food,
And
you had an inkling that food and getting a nutrition degree could help.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, because, you started to hear stories, and you started to hear, if you just eat enough fruits and vegetables, if you get enough antioxidants, this is, protects your body and this might help you. And so I was just so curious. So, initially in my early, education, as I went through high school and initially went into college, my grandma got a brain tumor. I was very close to my grandma growing up. I wish I could write a whole book about my life story. You've read my book. My first chapter is 17 pages. It was originally like 45 pages. And my editor was like, it's too long. But
Not for me. We can do a part 2, Michelle. I
we
will
can do
read
a part
it.
2. My mom
every
was
detail.
very absent growing up due to she struggled with bipolar disorder and eating disorder. And so I was very close to my grandma, and she had a brain tumor and died when I was in college. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to be like my sisters. My 2 oldest sisters are MDs. And I want to go and fix this and learn about this. But I became so discouraged, kind of what I saw of some of the medical system. Just that, we weren't really solving cancer with all this, pharmaceuticals. And, I thought, and that was another motivation, like, is there a nutrition component that can stop cellular proliferation, because that's what cancer is, right? It doesn't shut off. Cells just continue to multiply. So ultimately, I decided I'm going to become a dietitian. And when I did, I went into the dietetic internship. There were just things that didn't make sense, and this is one thing that I really worry about, especially our young people. We're fed all this information through Instagram, through TikTok, through, all these web pages and things. And we've stopped asking questions. We've stopped using critical thinking skills. We just say, okay, well, the expert said that's it. So that's it. Right. For example, I remember I would follow my preceptor into a room with someone with type 2 diabetes. And she would say, okay, Michelle, we're going to teach them to have 75 grams of carbs at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a 15-gram carb stack. And I would just say, whoa, Ann, maybe I shouldn't use names, but whatever. I would say, hey, shouldn't we, they can't tolerate carbs. Their blood sugar is high. Well, yes. So shouldn't we teach them to eat less carbs? Oh, no. We're going to teach them to match it with their insulin. And that's one of the big problems of current nutrition and dietetics is it doesn't matter what disease you have. If you're obese, if you're underweight, if you have kidney failure, of type 2 diabetes, if you have heart disease, our nutrition guidelines still say that carbohydrates are the foundation of human nutrition. So, but I was young, you're a student. You're like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing. And then when we went to the ICU, I remember flipping over the tube feeding and being like, oh my God, look at this. This is the same stuff I was fed as a kid. Like, and that time I was 24, so 12 years later. And I was like, why do we still give people canola oil? Why don't we give them, fish oils and anchovy oils? Why are we giving people maltodextrin? Michelle, hey, it's all about calories. Doesn't matter where they're from. Please stop asking questions. I was kind of pegged as this difficult dietetic student. So I just, once again, pose question, is this the best way? Because if you're being tube fed, many times it's because you can't eat. You have throat cancer, you've been in a major car accident. So I would just say, is this the best way to refeed somebody in an incredibly inflamed state? So yeah, I became a dietitian and I saw the cycle of sickness. We had what we would call frequent flyers. People come into acute care with, a diabetic infection. In a few months, they come back, a large open wound. Now they have neuropathy in their feet. Now their kidneys are failing. And we were just told hey, it's not our fault. It's not that the nutrition guidelines are bad. It's that the patients really aren't adhering to these guidelines. And so, it became very disheartening. And you're also, I've said this on other podcasts, every single medical professional I've ever met genuinely cares. They want people to heal. They just have you're overwhelmed with the patient load and given just minimal time. I remember sometimes patients, especially older patients that start telling me about their grandkids and I'll be like, oh, I gotta go, wrap it up. But you're also not only even minimal time, giving people advice saying, hey, we just need you to eat protein and calories. It doesn't matter if it's from this 45 gram of sugar dessert or from this caramel macchiato. We just need you to eat is terrible advice. So, but yeah, it wasn't really until I lost my own health in 2019 that I made a complete change. So became this traditional dietitian, gave a bunch of bad advice, and then, had my own health crisis that kind of turned my world upside down and led to the writing of the book.
Amazing. I mean, so you worked in the field with I love that you were always questioning though. And I love that you're questioning I can hear you. You're so clear about this issue, this issue, this issue, this issue, this constellation of, we're getting into hundreds and, thousands of diagnoses and issues that all come back to sort of the root issue. But I think that you being a questioner from the start was phenomenal. And that, you continue that work as a questioner and as someone who brings clarity to the issues. I want to get into your story as well and how that transformation happened, but I want to circle to right now. The problems are so vast and wide and intense. Are you seeing any signs? Are you seeing anything that's helping you to think that there's going to be a different road, for example, for the dietetics role? Is there any, I know, I saw that's a big question. I'm sorry.
No, it's a great question. And I'll tell you, I remain cautiously hopeful. Okay. When I was, when I newly got my health back and I became so excited, I naively thought that bringing research forward to major institutions and showing them, we have this clinical trial. This isn't, anecdotal. Let's make these changes would be very useful. But of course, I was met with a ton of resistance. And I think we have to be very careful and go in the situation like eyes wide open. We are asking an institution, if you heal people, you lose customers. We are offering a way to heal people, to help people, but we're also saying, and we're about to bankrupt a lot of pharmaceutical companies and big food companies. And they are the members of the dietetic board, the Academy of Nutrition, which is the governing board of all dietitians, who makes my education, all dietitians' education, sponsors our continuing education, is heavily sponsored by Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, Abbott, who makes Ensure, the Sugar Foundation, the National Confectionery Association, and they have members on these boards that make up the guidelines. So I think it is going to be very difficult to make policy change. I think grassroots is potentially the way to go, but I'll offer maybe at the end of this something I'm working on with some other people.
Oh, good.
We have some hope of maybe doing something. We'll see.
Okay. So let's go back. And so you were obviously coming into this profession with so much frustration, so much hope that you could figure out your own keys to success, that you could turn things around. And so what was that period of time like that things actually did, that you got to your kind of your break point where things started coming together for you, and what you have now figured out is the best way to go about this?
Yeah. And, so I thought as a young dietitian, through my 20s, like, if I can just, eat these whole grains, eat all these fruits and vegetables, I ate so much like lean protein, chicken, and that was the way to go. And it's interesting, even looking back at pictures. And I also became a competitive athlete. I was training for marathons, and looking back at pictures, I'm like, oh man, I look rough, So it was 2019, and I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. So in order to do that at that time, the standard was under 2 hours and 48 minutes. I believe they've dropped it to 2:43. But I run at 2 hours and 54 minutes. So I was like bumping up my training. I was running a ton, and I was working at a hospital in Portland, Oregon. And it just seemed like overnight, all of a sudden I was really struggling on my runs. I was, everything felt achy. I was breaking out in cold sweats, and disproportionate to what I was used to, because I'd run for many, many years. So I was used to normal muscle soreness. And of course, you go to your family doctor, you get a bunch of lab tests done, and everything was pretty much normal. And so I reached out to a few sports dietitians, and they said, oh, you're not eating enough. You need more calories, more carbohydrates. Carbohydrates fuel that activity. And I was like, are you sure? I mean, I was getting 400 grams of carbohydrates. To put it in perspective, a banana is 25 grams. So obviously I wasn't eating like 16 bananas, but I was eating a lot of oatmeal and a lot of brown rice and bananas and granola bars. And so I was like, all right, because I'm driven and I wanted this so badly. I said, all right, well, let's double down. Let's, pack in those carbs. And as you can imagine, that did not go particularly well. I went from feeling pretty achy and dizzy to I started having panic attacks. I would actually remember driving to work one day, and I just broke out in a cold sweat, like on my way to work. I had to pull over. And then kind of the come to Jesus moment was we just had a rough day. I floated at the hospital I was working at, meaning I covered a bunch of different floors. So I've been covering oncology, and we had a young patient pass, and, came home early, feeling kind of down. Fell asleep on the couch early, like 3:00 in the afternoon. And then I woke up, and it was like 2 a.m. Like I'd slept, several hours, but it just felt like my body was on fire. Like my muscles hadn't been recovering, and I can't even fully describe it. Just achy, my back hurt, my body hurt. And I remember just standing in the kitchen being like, I am out of ideas. I do not know what to do. I've consulted very smart people. I consider myself a relatively smart human. We've tried ibuprofen, we've tried narcotics, we've tried alcohol, weed, you name it. Nothing is helping. And so I grabbed my car keys and drove to 7-Eleven and got 30 pounds of ice and just put it in the bathtub. And I'm just lying in this ice bath at 3 a.m. by that point, crying. And that's when, my wife came in and was like, I think we should try something different. And I just bawling, I was like, yeah, I'm done running. This is stupid. Forget it. I was 36 at the time. I was like, I'm too old to be competitive. This is a post-college 24-year-old's game. And I decided at that moment, and at that point, I'd been running for 2 decades. So it's kind of a big deal, but it But I think that has to happen, right? You sometimes for major change to happen, you have to just be broken in all areas. Physically, I was broken. Emotionally, I was broken. Spiritually, like everything felt broken. And if you had told me, if someone had called me and said, hey, Michelle, this point is going to be a really good turning point in your life, I probably would have been like, get the fuck out of here, because you're so upset. But the next day, I remember thinking like, God, if I'm not going to run all these miles, maybe I should reduce my carbohydrates. Like, I kind of intuitively knew it wasn't making me feel good, but it had been so pounded into my head as a dietitian. You need this, it's good for you. If you lower your carbs and eat fat, you'll die, your heart will explode, all this stupid stuff. So I decided the next day, like, okay, I'm going to take a few days and just research. I want to understand, could I potentially benefit from just eating more protein, dropping the carbs? And, I was researching a ketogenic diet, and I still worked at the hospital at this time. So I had access not just to, whatever, Bobby Joe says on the internet, but like clinical trials. And I'm going through and I'm like, holy crap, there was so many clinical trials on ketogenic diets and type 2 diabetes. Wow. I couldn't believe it. Nobody had taught me that. And I'm like, like the stuff Dr. Eric Westman
sitting there quietly, just not getting attention. They're just hanging out.
Yeah, I was like, we can get someone off 150 units of insulin in 8 days. I had patients that were diabetic for decades. I was just like looking through this and I was reading it and I was like, oh my God, no way. And so, and then I'm like, okay, forget it. I'm going on a ketogenic diet. I need to try this for myself. And as I was kind of like, writing that down, preparing that, outlining what that would look like, I was introduced to the carnivore diet. I saw, people advertising that. And I literally, like a lot of people, I'm sure, was just like, that's funny.
Oh, they think it's a joke. People still think when I tell them that, like, yeah, they think it's a total joke. Yeah.
Oh, what a bunch of nonsense. Cause I said, hey, I grew up, born and raised in Texas. I love, we ate meat growing up, but I was like, why in the world would anybody eat all meat? Like that can't make sense. That can't fuel your health. But then once again, as I started this, podcast out saying like, we've stopped asking questions. We've stopped critical thinking. So I said, okay, well, I'm seeing these people like, Sean Baker and Carnivore Yogi. They look pretty damn healthy. I'm pretty not healthy. So, I sent a few messages to some various people and said, look, this is what's going on. Tell me more. Because they're at that time, and I don't know, we may have a few, but there were no clinical trials on the carnivore diet. But when I'm also, my wife in particular loves anthropology and we love evolution. So looking back over evolution, I was like, this is kind of how humans ate, like throughout time. And, researching like, well, what was their health like? What was their bone density like? And I was like, God, this kind of makes sense. And then the more we got into it, the more we went down the rabbit hole, I was like, I want to do this. I want to try this. Let's give it a try for a month.
Oh, this was very early because you had just gone keto. Was like the research that you're getting.
The research, and I hadn't even ketoed yet. I was literally day one, let's do keto. And then like, okay, well, instead of keto, because my wife originally was like, okay, I don't know how I feel about keto. It's kind of scary. It kind of feels eating disordered. And to be fair, I have a history of an eating disorder, struggle with eating disorder. So you can imagine me saying like, all right, forget keto. Let's just do pure meat. She was like, that in no world is this happening. That is a terrible idea. It will set you back. Get out of here. And, we thought about it, went back and forth. And finally she was like, well, you're an adult. Do what you want. You're going to quit. This will never work. And, and I always say that I didn't know much about electrolytes. If anybody's, make sure you take electrolytes.
Yes. Yes. And I heard somebody recently say that, we call that the keto flu or the adaptation flu, but what did Mike Collins just said? He's like, I call it carbohydrate, like a, when you're getting it out and you're going through your detox. It's sugar detox.
Like almost kind of like an addiction withdrawal type thing. And keep in mind, I had not been a 100, 200, 300 gram of carbohydrate eater. As an athlete, I was consuming a lot of carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So to go from eating almost 500 grams a day to eating 10, there's just things that happen on your body on a physiological level. And of course, now I know this, hindsight is 2020, where you will massively benefit from ensuring you have adequate sodium and potassium and magnesium. Probably about the third day of doing this, I had the worst headache ever. Like literally driving home, the traffic lights hurt. And, I come in and my wife, who already does't like this, is like, how's that diet going? It's great. It's great. But about a week into it, I noticed for the first time in many months, my muscles didn't hurt. Like, oh God, but then it was like, well, it must be just because I'm not running. Then it was like a week and a couple days, we were at a meeting, a staff, very exciting staff meetings. And my dietetic coworker is kind of jittery next to me. And she's just like, all right, Michelle, I got to go get a snack. And and I'm like, Chrissy, we're going to eat lunch at like noon. And she looked at me and was like, it's 2. And I remember thinking like, oh, because I was someone who had to eat every couple hours.
Oh, the first time some appetite control was starting to come in.
And I was calm. I noticed that difficult patient cases didn't really bother me. I was much more like, yeah, it's cool. Like my mood changed. I became just like a lot calmer. I spoke easier. I spoke more clearly. And then it was about 21, 22 days, about 3 weeks when I came home. Corinne's my wife. She beat me home. And she was just sitting there on the couch. And when I walked in, I was like, oh, hey. And she was like, hey, I need to talk to you. And like, ooh, yikes. Like, we've been together forever. But it's like something died, something really wrong. And so I went over and she was just like, I don't know what to do, but like, I don't even know if I like how you're eating, but I can't stop thinking about how this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And we both just kind of stared at each other. And she was just like, we have to know why. Like, if this is real, we have to know why.
She's this thinker, questioner, anthropologist, whatever.
Yeah, she's a scientist. Right? She's brilliant. What? She's way smarter than I am. And so we just were like, all right, every single, once again, she works in a healthcare institution. So like, all right, I got access to clinical trials. You got access to clinical trials. Let's print out everything we can find on low carb ketogenic. So, we have this like massive pile of all this different stuff. And we're just reading it and we're listening to podcasts and we're getting excited. And we're like, there's something to this. This is hyperinsulinemia may be the foundation of every inflammatory condition and may even potentially have implications for mental disorders. Like, we're listening to Chris Palmer and Georgia Eat, and we're like, and that of course leads me back to how I naively thought that the hospital institution I worked at would be very excited about this information. But I was quickly told like, hey, we are legally bound to teach the current nutrition guidelines because of potential getting sued.
Yes.
So
that made some decisions really clear. So what happened in your life professionally from that point? I know it was a process. And when you guys pursue something, you pursue it with vigor. And did is your wife mostly carnivore? I'm kind of curious about that. And how did that kind of determine your steps from there? And where are you at now?
Yeah. And, I honestly don't talk about this a whole lot because I don't feel like it's necessarily my story to share. But Corinne does deal with chronic pain. She was diagnosed over a decade ago. And obviously that shifted the dynamic of our life. You met her, you've seen her, you would never know. But that had been a struggle for her. So, we've obviously tried a bunch of different interventions for that. And so her seeing the massive success for me, she was like, all right, I want to try this too. And so she tried that, and at the same time, I was still working in the hospital, but was thinking about like, how much longer can I do this? Like, am I going to be able to continue to work in a way where I am giving advice that I know could be harmful? Because it's one thing, even if you're like, well, maybe this will help, maybe it won't, but it's like, can I genuinely go into somebody's room, give them advice, knowing it could kill them? Absolutely. So that was a hard question to answer. And I get, emails and DMs from dietitians and students all the time saying like, I know now, but I am the breadwinner. It's my insurance. Like, what do I do? And so my answer would be just, I'm very fortunate, Corinne has a really good job. So we were able to kind of say like, okay, this is our exit plan.
Gotcha.
So I would tell anybody else, like, start developing an exit strategy, whatever that looks like for you. And, if you have to stay somewhere for a couple of years or whatever, until you can make that work, until you can do something else, then you need to do obviously what's best for you and your family. And that's kind of what I did. Because I will always say, I will neither confirm nor deny that I would go into a patient room and say, this is what I'm going to chart that we talked about. Would you like to know what would actually help you? Actually, a patient once told his nurse that I had given him some low carb education, which got me suspended. from the hospital. It's not, I mean, it wasn't funny then, but it's kind of funny now. So, but every free moment I had, that I was still working in healthcare, I just was typing in Microsoft Word. I was typing about the book. I was typing about my experience. I was saying, like, I don't care if nobody buys this book. I have to share my story. I have to. Well, it's actually funny because I called my sister. I love my sisters. I got 3 older sisters. I called Heather and said, like, what if nobody buys it? And she's like, well, I'll buy 5. I was like, all right, well, I got 5 copies. So yeah, and so every free moment I had, I was just like, you know what, let's talk about disease states that, one, I feel like the evidence is very good for low carbohydrate diets. Mm-hmm. 2, there are great experts in the field that will help me. Yep. And that I, once again, that I can feel I can speak very well about. I do think we have some really good evidence for ketogenic diets and cancer, but it's just, 1, it was not my area of expertise. And 2, I think we just wasn't quite ready to go there yet, but for the book, we want type 2 diabetes. The evidence is overwhelming. If you have type 2 diabetes, a low carb diet will save your life, change your life, reverse your disease. I can say that very confidently. Mental disorders. It is amazing to me that ketogenic diets are not the first line for major depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia.
We get into a little bit of the whys behind that. Is it, I don't know if how deep or how shallow we can get with that, but to mental disorders. And then I specifically want to hear about like the binge eating disorder, but yeah, I just want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I worked in mental health. So I worked in 2 mental health institutions throughout my dietetics career. And, it's kind of like the advice for nutrition for mental health. It's kind of like everything else, like try to eat healthier, eat fruits and vegetables. And I saw kind of the extreme, people who were really depressed would either like eat nothing, or they would kind of like be using substances, or they would just be eating all kinds of stuff. But what we feed in our institutions, like the average, like if you just had a non-select tray in a mental health institution, you're getting 42 teaspoons of sugar a day. 42. That's the equivalent of like 5 Coca-Colas. It's ridiculous. But why? So why can a ketogenic diet, a low carbohydrate diet, why might that potentially help somebody with a major depression? Because I have people tell me like, I tried eating clean. I tried whatever. It's not just eating clean. I want you to think about it like epilepsy. So what is epilepsy? That's a seizure disorder. Babies are born with epilepsy. They didn't do anything wrong. It's not like mom was feeding them, chocolate milk or whatever. They just have a disorder. They have a metabolic disorder to where when they consume glucose or carbohydrates, they will have a seizure. It's just a metabolic disorder in the brain. So how do we fix that? We feed them ketogenic, very low carbohydrate diets. So their brain is now fueled with ketones and they stop seizing. In many cases, people with epilepsy that like don't respond to medication, just ketogenic diet, boom, seizure's gone. Yep. So we didn't even used to think that the brain had insulin receptors. Now we know it does. And so now looking at like, do people with major depression, do people with visual and auditory hallucinations, schizophrenia, do they just not metabolize carbohydrates in the brain well? And what we're seeing is that people have all these low carb ketogenic diets, and there's a bunch of other effects. People have said, well, it's just because they're stabilizing their blood sugar. Is it just because they're getting all this nutrient dense food? I don't know. We're going to have some more clinical trials on this in the future. I mean, those things in themselves are very good, but the hypothesis is certainly that they're just fueling their brain with a different substrate than they were when they were eating their regular diet.
Amazing. And how does fat play into that picture with folks that are having the mental issues?
That is so crucial. If there was ever anything that we just messed up in nutrition, was encouraging people to do low fat diets, low animal fat diets. We actually, statistically, we eat less animal fat. We actually eat less animals than we did like 40 years ago. And we eat significantly more vegetable oils, canola oils, seed oils, and things. And we also even eat less sugar than we did. Like it's because people, and even slightly less, and we're eating more fruits and vegetables statistically, and our health is just exponentially worse. So what we have found that the human body and the human brain benefits from, fat is the most blood sugar stabilizing macronutrient. meaning it keeps your blood sugar nice and stable. And it's so important for absorbing fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. Those vitamins are very important for making hormones, having bone density, making, involved in every cellular membrane. So, the combination of ensuring you get enough fat and also ensuring you have enough animal protein. And this is very important because this is something our society is moving away from. Protein is not created equal. If I show you a steak with 20 grams of protein, that'd be a small steak, but a steak and a big thing of tofu, they are not the same, even if they both have 20 grams of protein, and that's a big mistake we've made because this red meat, this animal-based protein, has all kinds of cofactors in it. When I say things like that, what I mean is zinc and B12 and folate and carnitine and carnosine and things that create the neurotransmitters that make your brain work correctly. On the other hand, a lot of these soy protein or these fake proteins, not only do they not have those cofactors in them, they often have things added to them, fibers, oils, maltodextrin that can actually be inflammatory. So we are so much better served when we get back to more ancestral eating, when we base the foundation of our nutrition on animal fats and animal proteins. And I think one of the main reasons people are scared to do that is because of heart disease and LDL. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I want to. There's a couple things I want to circle back when you're talking about the amino acids and the protein. And so I feel like so when we're talking about this spectrum that you have with a steak and the cofactors, I love that you mentioned cofactors. And so what I have understood and heard is that these are kind of stored as well. And so in the body, you have, you get deficiencies, but then when you get things kind of topped up, then it can kind of see you through future times that are, famine or times like this. And so I love that what you were saying, because that's kind of how I think about it. That makes sense to me is I feel like when you're thinking about your neurotransmitters and the substances that your body needs, that this gives you the component parts, the basic component parts for all of that. Am I getting close?
Yes, no, that's exactly it. As you are building, it is everything your body needs. I say to work synergistically, to work perfectly and together to have a healthy body and healthy brain. And like you said, I mean, throughout history, humans went for times with famine, like they didn't eat. So they were able to utilize those stores. Where now we've literally set ourselves up to where if we don't eat every few hours, we get shaky, dizzy. I used to find that fascinating. And, if you, having worked in the hospital, obviously for a long time, morbidly obese patients, I'm talking, 600, 700 pounds, that would tell me, like, if they missed a meal, they'd say, I'm so hungry, I'm starving. And they're not lying to you. If you're overweight, there's nothing wrong with you. They literally cannot access their own body fat.
Yep.
They literally cannot. When you eat carbohydrates, especially when you become insulin resistant, insulin is an incredibly powerful hormone. It shuts off fatty acid oxidation like boom, because it was like, hey, I'm getting carbohydrates. I'm going to burn that sugar. I'm not burning fat, and that was throughout evolution. We didn't have a lot of sugar. So that didn't happen very often. So the only way for our bodies to burn fat, and burning fat is important. It doesn't matter if you're super duper lean running marathons or if you're obese or diabetic trying to become healthy. You need to burn fat for fuel, for steady energy, for mental health, for everything. So the goal to do that is we need to keep insulin low. You've got to keep insulin relatively low. And there's always somebody that wants to email me, but what about this? In general, we only have 7% of the population is metabolically healthy. 93% is not. Yes, there are special circumstances for some things. But I truly believe we could reverse a lot of chronic illnesses by simply just focusing on, we're going to keep our insulin low. We're going to focus on meat and fat. And if we're adding carbohydrates to our diet, it's going to be very small amounts to tolerance.
Absolutely. We will often say that the folks that come in that are in that morbidly obese category are very undernourished. And so it's like, they're having an energy deficiency and energy metabolism deficiency. And this is kind of this way back, but it's hard to convince folks of that when they think it's about the calories and you're trying to, get them to a spot where you are like focusing on the nutrients in the food. And then that's going to help solve the nutritional deficiencies, what's going to help the whole process to move further into heal.
How much have we shamed both are either people dealing with eating disorders or people dealing with severe underweight, severe overweight, with saying it's their fault. Like, oh, you're gluttonous. Oh, get your act together. We have just literally sucked as a society in helping people actually achieve health. And yeah, it frustrates me so much because, like you said, it's not their fault. If somebody is obese, it is not their fault. They've been given horrible information and they've basically been set up to fail. And when they fail, we blame them. So that's obviously why we're doing what we do. Like, I want to teach people, but there's another option.
Yes.
I have no ambitions of telling people how to eat or what to do. But if they are interested in trying something that I've seen a lot of success with, that helps a lot of people, that is good for the human body, I definitely think it's a good alternative.
It's phenomenal. And it's a whole body approach. Like we were just talking about this, just all of the systems come into synchrony or synergistic, that you were saying, that allows the body to work in synergistic ways when you have all the components that you need to do that. And so we're looking at, the amino acids coming from animal foods. And I get a lot of people that are like, well, what about pea protein? Because, we're going to get into the cholesterol question, but because they're so concerned about, that their cholesterol, that they go to pea protein. Can you tell me a little bit about some issues that people might have with that?
Yeah, well, let's just talk about cholesterol real quick, and so cholesterol is so important that if you literally consume 0 cholesterol from food, like you just say, because cholesterol is only in animal food. If you say, I'm a vegan, I'm never eating cholesterol, your brain will make all the cholesterol it needs. Like if you follow me and have listened to my advocacy, I think our current nutrition guidelines are the definition of idiocy. Like they're the dumbest things ever. But even the nutrition guidelines in 2015 were like, oh crap. Well, we're not going to limit cholesterol. Like they even got rid of that because the science was so poor. And so, what they did, and we're not going to, because it would be hours, but to sum it up, like in the 70s specifically, they made people really afraid of animal fats. They said LDL cholesterol is bad, HDL is good. You want less LDL, because they would look in occluded arteries. They would look in, people who had heart disease in their arteries, and they would actually find LDL stuck in the artery. And so once again, this is where critical thinking is important. This is where asking good questions is important, because correlation does not necessarily equal causation. Just because I look in a occluded artery and see LDL, the right, I guess I should say that anytime you think you have a correlation, you must test it with a hypothesis. So the right thing to do would have been to say, like, okay, well, we see this. Is consuming a ton of LDL really bad for you? Is that what is causing the heart disease? And then let me back you up to human evolution, the beginning of time. And we also saw in tribes like the Maasai and the Inuit Eskimos, like, okay, well, these people are eating 80% animal fat, like whale blubber, and they have no LDL stuck in their arteries. And then LDL is so important that we've even seen people with like high LDL, like especially as you got older, it prevented cognitive decline. It was like, oh, wow, grandma has crazy high LDL, but she doesn't have Alzheimer's disease. Oh my God, grandpa has crazy high LDL. He actually doesn't get infection because LDL is so important in your immune disease. Okay, Michelle, well, why do we see it in clogged arteries? Why does our government tell us that we shouldn't be having high LDL? Something has to happen for LDL to get stuck in your artery. If not, it flows freely. Like I used an analogy, like it's like your car that takes you to work. It's perfect. It does perfectly fine. Something has to happen. And all of a sudden your car gets stuck on the road. You wouldn't be like, oh crap, what's wrong with my car? You'd be like, why is my car stuck on the road? What has happened? So, I always ask, like, what do you think are the number one causes? You have to have some inflammation and oxidation in your arteries. So what do you think causes inflammation and oxidation in the arteries?
Gotta be sugar.
Hyperglycemia over time is the number one cause. When your blood sugar is high over time, it actually starts to, it changes the pH in your blood. It will damage the artery walls. And your body is so incredible. It's like, oh crap, it wants to like heal it. So LDL gets stuck in your arteries. So if you are type 2 diabetic and you have very high LDL, that's a big problem, right? But in the context of a low carbohydrate animal-based diet, when our blood sugar is stable, when our triglycerides are low, having high LDL can actually be a good thing. So once again, we have to look at it in context, and every doctor, and I shouldn't say every, unless you have a very low carb doctor, most doctors do not know this. You have to educate your doctor. Absolutely. And And if you're like me, you just have to have an understanding that like, look, I got to see it once a year. My insurance says that. I know my LDL is high. Here's a copy of my book. Like, don't email me about it,
Oh,
because our medical system is even set up that a lot of doctors have to prescribe a statin if your LDL is high. So,
right. That's in the guidelines of what they have to do. They have to follow that procedure. And so,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so what are the things that you're looking at when someone is looking at that, but they want to feel safe? How do you help them to feel safe? What are the other pieces of the picture?
Probably one of the best things you could do if you're just like, oh my God, I've been eating terrible my whole life, is like, go ahead and get like a coronary artery scan. What am I starting with? What is my starting point?
Nice.
And that's not something that's covered by insurance. But that's something you could definitely at least know, like, okay, here I am. But if you're like, okay, when would it theoretically be okay to have higher LDL? I want your blood sugar in a normal range. I want your A1C, to be out of the diabetic range, and of course I feel like they keep raising it. They're like, well, people can't get 7. So how about 7.5? Your A1C should not be 7 or 7.5. So obviously having an A1C that's in the normal range, and that's just A1C is a measure of your blood sugar over a 3-month period. And then you want your triglycerides to be in the normal range. And then, if you can have your doctor measure, fasting insulin. You can certainly have them measure like C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory marker. But in general, like if you just got that kind of regular panel, I always ask them, what are my triglycerides? What is my blood glucose? And what is my A1C? And don't freak out if your blood glucose is like, if low is here and high is here, carnivore, low carb people tend to be all, like, oh, it wasn't towards the super low. It's like, don't worry about that. You're in the
Can you talk about those ranges a little bit? Because I get that question all the time as a coach. People are just freaked out if they ever tiptoe like near a 120 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so to me, I'm just like, this is so dependent on some other issues. And this is one that goes around a lot, right? So they'll base it on this one moment in time on their fasted, and it's not, they want it to say 65 or something. If it's
exactly. Right. I'm never worried about a moment in time, just like I would hope nobody else would be worried about. Life is what we do all the time, every day. That's what's going to make you great or terrible at something, right? And then there are many things that affect blood glucose that have nothing to do with food. You can go into a doctor's office and you don't like needles and be really nervous and your heart is racing. That can just stress can spike your cortisol. If you've ever worn like a CGM, I tell people to do it if you can. It's kind of go into a really crappy meeting or something. It's interesting. You can like, whoa, look at that. It went out. Exercise, there's all kinds of different things, even like what you ate the night before. Protein breaks down into glucose through via gluconeogenesis. And but we have plenty of evidence that is not going to cause diabetes, whatever. But the point being, like, obviously if you went in, you got your blood glucose tested and it was like 250, it was astronomically high. Like that's something we need to talk about. And then they should, measure your A1C and your A1C is high. But yeah, if it's like a little on the high side, don't worry about it. I mean, I recently had to go to the doctor. We had a dog bite. My dog got into a fight with another dog at the dog park. I had to separate them and their dog got me. My blood pressure was really high.
Right.
I was in pain. My blood pressure, I traditionally have pretty low blood pressure as an athlete. And it was like the first time in my life it's been like off the chart high. So, I'm not going to go out of there being like, wow, I must have a heart condition. I'm just like, hey, I'm in pain. I'm stressed. I'm whatever. So so that's what we really want to focus. We want people to look at like health holistically, like what am I doing day in, day out? Like that's what's going to make, and it's so hard. That's probably the hardest thing I'm sure is even like a health coach is getting people to buy into the process. Like Google, Amazon, they've all made us be like, where is it? Quick, Netflix, boom, boom, it's on. We have to take it one day, one meal, one, life interaction at a time, knowing that healing too can take a journey. I'm better. I started in 2019. I was a better fat adapted athlete in 2020, 2021, every year I'm getting better. I'm learning more. I'm changing. So yeah, we can't expect things to be overnight, and we certainly don't want to get bummed out if something's not exactly what we think it should be.
Absolutely. And do you sometimes see on the HbA1c that I've heard this philosophy that our red blood cells maybe are a little bit better off on iron, and so they last a little bit longer. And so they might be potentially in, we might not get that perfect score on that. Have you seen that in the carnivore space at all, specifically with folks that are eating all meat?
I specifically haven't, but I mean, theoretically, that certainly could be a thing. So then once again, that's like, and that's why I think it's very important to whatever you decide to do, especially with health, like you got to buy in, you have to trust, give it time. I always tell people like, you can't, I can't tell you how many people come up to me and we're like, I tried to give up sugar, but I couldn't do it. Well, how long did you try? Oh, this weekend, 5 days, 3 days. How long I tried keto, but it was terrible. How long did you do it? 2 weeks. Like, you have to, ideally got to give yourself an opportunity. I always say 30 days minimum to see a change.
Oh my gosh. I love it if they would give us 90 days.
90 is ideal. Sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their head around. And usually when you feel better, you want to continue on, right? But we also are fighting a huge battle. I validate that the way people are eating is not just about hunger. It's about emotional management skills. It's about comfort. It's about literally being addicted to certain food products and substances. And we also live in a modern world where processed foods are a highly acceptable addiction. As I say, like you're here talking on this podcast, if I pulled out some, it's early in the morning. If I pulled out a bottle of vodka, you'd be like, whoa, hey, easy, what's going on? That's right. But most podcasts, if I was drinking a Coca-Cola, no one would care. Like you can do that in a dietitian work meeting and they're just like, oh, cool. Can I have one? So our society views sugar as and all processed foods just as like, yeah, it's cool. We give it to our kids, give it to our grandma, eat it all day, every day. So in my view, if you truly want to be a healthy human, you really have to rise above. You have to buy in. You have to know that it's going to be difficult. You're going to get a lot of resistance. And that's why, just like anything else in life, right? You have to have a why. Like, what do I really want to get out of this?
Amazing. What have been some of the sources of when I think about that journey? To me, I've been an honor to be a part of communities and part of little carnivore groups, and that this is happening more and more out there. Has that been a role in your experience, and how have you seen people put those connections together to walk free out of that addiction?
Yeah. It's amazing how kind of buying out of the nonsense, and we talked a little bit about eating disorders, especially binge eating disorders. I, spoke with a woman who for 10 years, she was just in and out of treatment centers, gained a ton of weight, suicidal, all this stuff. But they kept telling her in these eating disorder centers, you will know you are well when you can eat all things in moderation. And she would do okay. And then a second, she said, I went to the 7-Eleven and bought a Twix, and I would eat just one bite and I'd throw it away. And she said, within 5 minutes, I dug it out of the trash, ate it, driving. And she's like, so they kept telling me I am the problem. I am wrong.
Yes.
And now we have a very good case study. I'd be happy to send it to you, of 3 people with a lifelong binge eating disorder that followed a ketogenic diet for a year. And they were tracked very closely. And not only did they, they were all morbidly obese, lose weight, they had remission of symptoms. And these are people with decades. And what I find even more amazing is they had statistically significant improvement in mood. Their lifelong depression improved. And like you said, when you put it together, people are going to want to do something and act in a way that makes their life better. When you eat a lot of meat and fat, it's delicious. It tastes good. It makes you feel good. So your mental health improves, your physical health improves. So yes, is there still just kind of this pull of the world that's like, try this, try that, whatever? Yes, of course. But in my experience, when you give yourself an opportunity to see what, I just say just freedom, food freedom is like, it really changes how you look at food. It changed how I looked at food. I used to think so much. I say with all the time and energy I spent, I could build a small city, just constantly worrying, obsessing, thinking about food. And that's not what life is supposed to be. That's not what food was supposed to be. It should purely just be food for your body to move on to whatever else you want to do in life.
Absolutely. And I love that, because I feel like there needs to be support system for us, which we have. And we found that for those of us that are, that have found that this way is the way that we want. And that's looked at it's looked at as an eating disorder. We are literally called, people that are 100% carnivore, we're called, you're orthorexic. You're so focused on, specific food categories. Like, you're the disorder. We're like, actually, we're the freedom. Like, we're walking out in this path where we're not taking the little bit of the Twix and grabbing it out of the trash. Like, this is how we found that control. And it's such a generous mindset that just kind of frees you to, go about your other things in life than the food obsession. I remember you talking about food freedom in the book, and I remember you referencing that. And that is one of the miracles when you've been a slave to it and you go through that process and experience food freedom. You're like, this is a freaking miracle. I could talk about this every day, it seems, right?
Yeah, it really is. And it's just nice to like live life. Life is really beautiful. And I believe that a lot of people don't even know how terrible they feel just because it's, they spend their entire lives with this kind of suboptimal level of health.
Yes.
And, now we have all the popular media. And like you said, people saying like, oh, if you can't ask someone with a dysfunctional relationship with food to give up food, but we're defining food as like Oreos and granola bars, things that literally, can exacerbate our physical and mental health. That doesn't make sense to me. And I also am of the belief that, following an ancestral diet is the best thing you can do for your health. That's what we did throughout history without any issues. And I'm also, some people, I do believe a lot of people can tolerate small amounts of carbohydrates. And I know people are like, oh, are you anti-carb? No, I'm not anti-carbohydrate. I grow carrots. We eat some carrots, we eat. But when you eat, seasonally, when you eat fresh, and some people are fine just meat and fat. Like there's, people did that for hundreds and hundreds of years without issues. But when you eat in a way where you have metabolic health, when you're able to burn both fat and glucose, your life will be better. I genuinely believe that. And I believe that we just haven't set ourselves up in a society for that to be an acceptable way to live, which sounds totally bizarre.
Amazing. Absolutely. Well, I want to hear what's happening in your life currently. Like, you went through this process, you've been through all of this, and you've given us this incredible gift. I hope there are more books coming from you that have more stories in it.
There's maybe, we'll see. I haven't.
Okay. Yeah. What are you up to? What's going on, and what do you have coming?
Yeah. So, since leaving healthcare, and I'm very upfront with this, it's been very like financially, that's what people ask me, like, do you miss healthcare? I'm like, only the paycheck,
Right.
because it's a huge hit financially leaving just a good paycheck. And I love my book. I'm super proud of it, but it's, I think Amazon makes more on it than I do. So, what I continue to do is I do nutrition consults, which I really like and appreciate. And I also, obviously I train for ultra marathons. So that takes up several hours of my day. And then from there, I'm kind of just hustling. I do some sales stuff. I do some work for like a chiropractic clinic, do a lot of different kind of, keep myself busy, stay financially feasible type stuff. But yeah, I don't have any like that I only do. But for as far as what I'm doing on a nutrition related level, and I do have the charity that I started, which is doing well, which is kind of cool. So I started the protein project. We give meat to food banks, which has been really cool. But what I'm super excited about is on June 17th, I will be going to, sorry, not 17th, 14th to Washington, D.C. to be meeting with like Dr. Finney and Jeff Volek and a few other low carb experts. And we are attempting to draft a policy to add a low carbohydrate option to the next round of nutrition guidelines. So we're not going to replace them, since they have made that very clear that they're not interested in that. But if we can all come together where we have a definition, we have all the science, if we can get it just as an option, that will open the door for it to be able to be prescribed in hospitals and for federal programs.
Is this for 2025?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, this is so exciting. And you're with the best minds and the people that are so passionate about getting this advocacy out there. So yeah, that is absolutely phenomenal. Oh my gosh, we definitely look forward to hearing the updates on that.
Thank you. What's interesting is that my particular role in this was defining and outlining that a low carbohydrate diet is nutritionally adequate. What do you know? It sure is. It wasn't that hard to do, but it does meet all the nutrition requirements.
Oh, Beautiful. I was at Low Carb Denver and I heard Brett Sure, he was talking about that ketogenic diet used as prescription. And so it should be used exactly the way any other pharma or medicinal is used. And it should have the pros and the cons and the details and the how to. You kind of need a lot of backup support and when you're kind of pushing this forward. And so this is just sounds so promising to me, because this sounds like if we can have this listed as an option with the guidelines, okay, we're going to get it in there however we can get that in there. But that would just change people's mind about it, and specifically the cholesterol conversation, because people just are having such a hard time getting a true understanding of that. And so the more people that, are in the official capacity that can explain that and help people calm down, like one by one by one. I was at a party last night and was engaging that conversation with people. And so the more that we can understand that and explain that, the better. And I love your, the car and the pothole.
Yeah.
Well, we need those. Those
Yeah.
are, we kind of got, we've heard
I think we
firemen
need easy analogies. We need people to really open up their eyes to context. Context is very important in a lot of things in life, and specifically when it comes to like LDL and heart disease.
Incredible. Okay, well, where can people find you? Where are you? Where I hear more?
Yeah, people are always welcome to follow me on Instagram. We do some fun educational videos at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. I am on Twitter at Michelle Hurn RD. The website, the dietitiansdilemma.net. And then the book is on Amazon. We have the paperback, Kindle, and Audible. And that really helps me. That supports me. So check out the book.
Absolutely. It's a phenomenal resource and I've enjoyed it so much. And it's, the vulnerability is incredible as well. Thank you, Michelle, for spending time with me today. I love your message. I love your heart. I love your passion. And I just, can't think of anybody that I've spoken to that can clarify and provide the details like so beautifully and thoroughly. And you have just such a gift for that. And so I just appreciate all the information that you've shared. It's been incredible.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm happy to come on anytime.
Oh, awesome.